The first thing I noticed was the way the doctor wouldn't look me in the eye. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as he explained my test results, but his hands told a different story. They shook slightly as he folded a small piece of paper and slid it across the desk toward me. At first, I thought it was another prescription or a referral slip. I smiled politely, thanked him, and reached for it without much thought. That was before I unfolded the note and read the words that would change everything. Don't go home. Run. For a moment, I honestly thought it was a joke. A strange, unprofessional joke, but a joke nonetheless. I looked up, ready to laugh it off, but the doctor's face was pale. His eyes flicked toward the door, then back to me. He leaned forward and lowered his voice. I can't explain right now, he said quietly. Just trust me. Do not go home tonight. Before I could ask anything else, he stood up, signaling the appointment was over. The nurse opened the door as if on cue, and suddenly I was back in the hallway, holding a note that made no sense and a growing sense of fear I couldn't explain. As I walked out of the hospital, the sounds around me felt distant, like I was underwater. Cars passed, people talked, phones rang. But all I could hear were those 4 words repeating in my head. Don't go home. Run. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe the doctor was stressed. Maybe he had mixed-up files. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding. But deep down, something felt wrong. The kind of wrong you feel in your gut before your mind can catch up. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. My phone buzzed with a message from my spouse, asking when I'd be home. That simple question sent a chill through me. Home had always been my safe place. It was where my life made sense. The idea that I shouldn't go there felt absurd, almost insulting. And yet, the image of the doctor's shaking hands refused to leave my mind. I decided to drive, telling myself I just needed time to think. The city lights blurred as I moved through familiar streets, but everything looked different now, like I was seeing my life from the outside. I passed the turn that would take me straight home and kept going. With every mile, my anxiety grew, but so did my curiosity. What could possibly be waiting for me at home that was so dangerous a doctor would risk his career to warn me? I pulled into a quiet parking lot and checked the note again, hoping I had misread it. The words were still there, written in hurried, uneven handwriting. I thought about calling the doctor, but his office was already closed. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? My doctor told me not to go home? It sounded ridiculous. So instead, I called my spouse and told a half-truth, saying I had to stay out late because of additional tests. There was a pause on the line, then a simple, okay, be safe. That pause bothered me more than it should have. Night fell faster than I expected. The temperature dropped, and the parking lot lights flickered on, casting long shadows. I decided to book a cheap motel room nearby, telling myself I'd go home in the morning once I had a clearer head. But sleep didn't come easily. Every sound outside my door made my heart race. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another message, another warning, something to explain what was happening. Sometime after midnight, curiosity won over fear. I opened my laptop and logged into my home security app, something I rarely checked unless we were on vacation. The cameras loaded slowly, one by one. The front porch looked normal. The living room was dark and empty. The kitchen lights were off. I let out a small breath of relief, feeling silly for panicking. Then I clicked on the camera facing the hallway. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Just the familiar outline of the door to our bedroom, the framed photos on the wall. But then the image shifted slightly, like someone had brushed past the camera. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding. The timestamp showed it was live. Someone was in my house. I told myself it had to be a glitch. Maybe a shadow. Maybe the camera adjusting. But then I saw the bedroom door slowly open. The light inside turned on, even though I knew we always turned it off before leaving the house. My hands started to shake as badly as the doctor's had earlier that day. I switched to another camera, then another. In the kitchen, a figure stood near the counter, moving calmly, like they belonged there. They opened drawers, touched objects, familiar objects, with an ease that made my stomach twist. This wasn't a break-in. This was someone who knew the house. Someone who knew where everything was.
My phone buzzed again.
A message from my spouse appeared on the screen. Are you on your way home? I stared at the words, then back at the camera feed, where the figure in the kitchen turned slightly, just enough for me to recognize the clothes. Clothes I had seen that morning. Clothes that belonged to someone I trusted. That was the moment the doctor's warning finally made sense, and also the moment I realized how little I truly knew about the life I thought was safe. My finger hovered over the call button, torn between fear, disbelief, and a desperate need for answers. Outside, a car engine started somewhere in the distance, and inside the screen, the figure began walking toward the front door. I didn't know if they were leaving or coming to find me. All I knew was that if I had gone home like I planned, I would have walked straight into something I might never have escaped. And as I sat alone in that dark motel room, watching my own house on a flickering screen, I understood that whatever was happening was far bigger and far more dangerous than a single note could ever explain. I closed the laptop so fast it felt like my fingers were on fire. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I sat there in the dark motel room, staring at the wall, trying to slow my breathing. Every instinct told me to grab my keys and drive as far away as possible, but another part of me needed answers. I needed to understand how my normal life had turned into something that felt like a nightmare in a single day. I opened the laptop again, more carefully this time, and lowered the screen brightness. The security app was still open. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. The front door camera now showed the door closed. The porch light was on. Whoever had been inside hadn't left, or if they had done it quietly. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my spouse. You're being really quiet. Is everything okay? I didn't reply. I couldn't. I was afraid that anything I said might make things worse. As I sat there, memories started surfacing, moments I had brushed off before, but now felt heavy with meaning. The late nights at work that didn't quite add up. The sudden interest in our home security system, insisting we upgrade it just to be safe. The way questions about my schedule had become more detailed over the past few weeks. At the time, it all seemed normal, even caring. Now it felt calculated. I thought back to the doctor's office, replaying every second in my mind. He hadn't warned me about an illness. He hadn't told me to prepare for bad news. He had warned me about my own home. That meant whatever he knew had nothing to do with my health, at least not directly. Or maybe it did, in a way I didn't understand yet. The test results, the rushed appointment, the note written like someone was afraid of being overheard. None of it felt random anymore. I tried to think of how the doctor could possibly know something about my personal life. Doctors see records, addresses, emergency contacts. They see patterns too. Maybe he had seen something in my file that didn't make sense. Or maybe someone else had come into that hospital asking questions about me. The thought made my skin crawl. Unable to sit still, I stood up and paced the small room. Every shadow looked suspicious. I checked the lock on the door twice, then a third time. I reminded myself that I was safe for now. No one knew where I was. At least, I hoped they didn't. I resisted the urge to call a friend. I didn't want to pull anyone else into this until I understood what was happening. After a while, I forced myself to look at the camera feeds again. The house was quiet. Lights off. No movement. It was almost worse that way. The silence felt like it was waiting for something. I switched to the garage camera. Empty. The driveway was clear. My car wasn't there, obviously, but neither was my spouse's. That didn't make sense. If they weren't home, who had been inside earlier? My phone buzzed again, this time with a missed call. My spouse. I let it ring. A few seconds later, a text came through. I'm worried. Where are you? I stared at the message, my chest tight. I typed a response, deleted it, then typed another. In the end, I sent something vague, saying I was still at the hospital and might stay overnight for observation. The reply came quickly. They didn't tell me that. That single sentence made my hands go cold. I sat back down on the bed, suddenly exhausted. The realization hit me that I might be dealing with someone who was carefully managing information, keeping different stories straight. Someone who knew how to sound concerned while hiding something else entirely. The thought that this person shared my bed, my meals, my daily routines was almost too much to handle.
I checked the time.
It was getting late, but sleep felt impossible. I opened my email and started scrolling through old messages, looking for anything unusual. Bills, work updates, family group chats. Everything looked normal on the surface. Then I noticed an email from our home insurance company, sent a week ago. It mentioned a request for documents related to the house. I had never seen it before. It hadn't been forwarded to me. Why would someone request documents without telling me? My mind kept circling back to the doctor. I wondered what would happen if I went back to him the next day. Would he still be willing to talk? Or would he pretend nothing had happened? People don't usually risk their jobs for strangers. That meant whatever he knew had scared him too. And that scared me more than anything. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of traffic outside. Every sound felt amplified. I thought about how safe I had felt that morning, walking into the hospital with ordinary worries. I had complained about traffic, about being tired, about nothing important at all. Now everything felt fragile, like one wrong move could shatter what little control I had left. Another notification popped up on my phone, this time from the security app. Motion detected. Living room. My breath caught in my throat. I opened the app slowly, my fingers trembling. The camera showed the living room lights turning on. Someone was there again. They moved through the space calmly, deliberately, stopping in front of the bookshelf where we kept important papers hidden behind old photo albums. I felt sick watching them pull the albums aside, like they knew exactly where to look. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, to wake up from what had to be a bad dream. But I stayed quiet, frozen, watching as my private life was searched piece by piece. The figure paused, then looked directly toward the camera, as if sensing they were being watched. Even though the face wasn't clear, the moment felt personal, almost threatening.
My phone rang again.
This time, I answered without thinking. "Where are you?" my spouse asked, their voice tight, controlled. I swallowed hard, choosing my words carefully. "I told you I'm not coming home tonight." There was a pause on the other end of the line, longer than before. "You should come home," they said finally. "We need to talk." The tone wasn't angry. It wasn't pleading either. It was something else, something that made my stomach twist. "I can't," I said, my voice barely steady. "Not tonight." Another pause. Then, softly, "That's disappointing." The call ended. I sat there in the dark, phone pressed to my ear long after the line went dead. On the screen, the living room light clicked off, plunging my house back into darkness. I didn't know what they were planning, or what they had already done. I only knew that the note the doctor had given me had saved me from walking straight into whatever trap was waiting. As dawn slowly approached, one question echoed louder than all the others. How long had this been going on, and how close had I come to never discovering the truth at all? Morning didn't bring relief the way it usually does. The light slipping through the thin motel curtains felt weak, almost uncertain, like it didn't belong. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the security footage replaying in my head, the calm movements, the way that person knew exactly where to look. I sat up slowly, my body heavy, my mind already racing ahead of me.
My phone lay on the nightstand, silent now.
No new messages. No missed calls. That silence felt intentional, like a pause before something bigger. I checked the security app again. The house was quiet. No motion alerts. No lights. It looked peaceful, almost normal, and that somehow made it worse. I knew now how easily that calm could be staged. I showered quickly, flinching every time water hit the tile too loudly. As I got dressed, I realized how strange it felt to choose clothes without knowing when I'd be back home. I packed my bag carefully, like I might not return to this motel either. The world had shifted overnight, and I didn't trust anything that felt routine anymore. Driving through the city that morning felt like moving through someone else's life. People walked dogs, grabbed coffee, complained into their phones. Everything looked normal, and I wonder how many of them were carrying secrets behind calm faces. I parked a few blocks away from the hospital, not wanting to be seen arriving too early. I didn't know who I could trust, and that thought followed me like a shadow. The doctor's office was quiet when I finally went in. The same nurse smiled politely, unaware that anything was wrong. I sat in the waiting room, my heart pounding louder with every second that passed. When the doctor stepped out and saw me, his expression changed instantly. Relief, fear, and something like guilt crossed his face all at once.
He didn't speak right away.
He just nodded toward his office and held the door open. As soon as it closed behind us, he locked it. The sound of the lock clicking into place made my chest tighten. "You didn't go home," he said softly. It wasn't a question. I shook my head. "Good," he replied, but his voice didn't sound relieved. It sounded worried. I asked him how he knew, how he could possibly know that my home wasn't safe. He rubbed his face with both hands, like he hadn't slept either. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to see," he said. "And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it." He explained that while reviewing records, he had noticed inconsistencies connected to my emergency contact information, insurance claims, and recent requests involving my address. On their own, they meant nothing. Together, they told a different story. "There are patterns," he said quietly, "and sometimes patterns point to danger." He wouldn't go into details, not fully. He said he couldn't, not without risking his job or worse. But he looked me straight in the eye and said one thing that stuck with me. "Whatever is happening isn't sudden. It's been building." I left his office with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't paranoia. Something real was unfolding, and I was already in the middle of it. I sat in my car afterward, gripping the steering wheel, trying to decide my next move. Going to the police felt risky, without proof. Confronting my spouse felt even more dangerous. I thought about people who might know something. A neighbor who always seemed to notice everything. A coworker my spouse talked about often, but I'd never met. Even family members who had grown distant for reasons I never questioned. The more I thought about it, the more cracks appeared in memories I had trusted. Later that afternoon, I received a message from my spouse that felt carefully written. An apology for the tone last night. A suggestion to meet somewhere public, just to talk. Reading it, I felt a mix of fear and sadness. This was someone I had planned a future with, someone I had defended to others without hesitation. Now, every word felt like it might be hiding something else underneath. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I drove past my house, staying across the street, watching from a distance. The curtains were drawn. The driveway was empty. From the outside, it looked like any other home on a quiet street. I wondered how many secrets could live behind those walls without anyone noticing. As I sat there, a car pulled up and parked a few houses down. Someone got out and walked toward my place, keys in hand. They unlocked the door like they belonged there. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just about one person. Other people had access. Other people were involved, or at least aware. I took photos, my hands shaking, knowing I might need proof later. I stayed until the lights inside turned on, then drove away before anyone noticed me. I felt like a stranger in my own neighborhood, someone watching a life that no longer belonged to them. That evening, I met an old friend for coffee, someone I trusted and hadn't seen in a while. I didn't tell them everything, just enough to explain that I needed help staying somewhere safe for a few days. They didn't ask too many questions, and I was grateful for that. Sometimes silence is a form of kindness. As night fell again, my phone buzzed with another notification. Motion detected. This time it wasn't my house. It was the garage camera, showing my car parked somewhere it shouldn't be. A location I didn't recognize. My heart started racing as I realized someone had accessed something they shouldn't have. Someone was moving pieces around while I was still trying to understand the game. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the screen, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I didn't know who was lying, who was watching, or how far this went. All I knew was that the life I thought I knew had layers I was only just beginning to uncover. And somewhere, not far away, people were making plans that included my name, my home, and my silence. By the third night, the fear had settled into something sharper, more focused. It wasn't just panic anymore. It was awareness. I was being careful with every move, every message, every place I went. I stopped using my car and borrowed my friends instead. I turned off location sharing. I checked reflections in windows and mirrors without meaning to. It felt like my life had split into two timelines, the one where everything used to make sense, and this new one where nothing could be taken at face value. My spouse kept texting, the messages shifting in tone. Concern turned into frustration, then back into calm reassurance. Each message felt tested, like it was designed to see how I'd respond. I answered less and less, choosing silence over lies. I knew that whatever was happening depended on me staying predictable, and I refused to be that. Late one evening, I got another alert from the security app. This time it wasn't motion. It was a settings change. Someone had tried to disable a camera. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through the activity log. The attempt had failed, but the message was clear. They knew I was watching. Or worse, they were trying to see how much I knew. I called the doctor again, even though I knew it was risky. He answered this time, but his voice was strained. "You shouldn't keep contacting me," he said quickly. "They're paying attention now." That single sentence made my chest tighten. I asked him who they were. He paused for a long moment. "People who don't like loose ends," he finally said. Then the line went dead. That night, I couldn't sit still. I drove aimlessly, staying on well-lit roads, stopping only when I felt too tired to keep going. My thoughts kept circling back to one question I hadn't dared to ask yet. Why me? I wasn't rich. I wasn't powerful. I didn't have secrets worth stealing. Unless the secret wasn't mine at all. I started going through old documents stored in my email and cloud accounts. Bank statements, insurance papers, property records. It took hours, but eventually I noticed small changes. Signatures that didn't quite match mine. Dates that had been adjusted. Requests I never remembered approving. Someone had been quietly rewriting parts of my life, and I had trusted them enough not to notice. The next morning, I woke up to a message that made my blood run cold. "I know you're not where you say you are." No name. No number I recognized.
Just that.
I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. A few seconds later, another message appeared. "We need to fix this before it gets messy."
I didn't reply.
I couldn't. I turned the phone off and sat there, listening to my own breathing. Whoever was behind this wasn't hiding anymore. The careful planning had shifted into pressure. That meant time was running out. I decided to take a risk. I went back to my house, but not to go inside. I parked far enough away to watch without being seen. The street was quiet, but there was a tension in the air I couldn't explain. A car I didn't recognize was parked nearby. The engine was off, but someone was inside. Waiting. I stayed in my car, gripping my phone, ready to record anything that happened. After a few minutes, the front door opened. My spouse stepped out, looking around before locking it. They didn't look worried. They looked prepared. That hurt more than I expected. As they walked toward their car, another person joined them, someone I had never seen before. They spoke briefly, leaning in close. I couldn't hear them, but their body language was familiar, practiced. This wasn't the first time they'd done this together. Whatever plan was in motion, it had been rehearsed. My phone buzzed again, even though I had turned it off. When I turned it back on, a new message waited. "You're close. Don't do anything stupid." I looked up just in time to see my spouse glance in my direction, their eyes scanning the street. For a split second, I thought they saw me. I drove away slowly, forcing myself not to panic. My hands were slick with sweat, my heart racing. They were tightening the circle. I needed proof. Something solid. Something that would explain why a doctor would risk everything to warn me. That evening, my friend told me someone had come by asking questions about me. They said they were worried that I'd been acting strangely. They described my spouse perfectly. The concern in my friend's voice turned into anger when I explained just enough for them to understand I wasn't safe. "You can stay as long as you need," they said. "But you can't keep running forever." They were right. Hiding wasn't a solution. It was just buying time. Just before midnight, I received one last notification. A calendar invite. No sender name. No explanation. Just a time, a place, and a note attached. If you want answers, come alone.
I stared at the address. It wasn't my house.
It wasn't the hospital. It was somewhere in between, a place tied to a memory I hadn't thought about in years. A place where a decision I made long ago had quietly set all of this in motion. I didn't know if it was a trap or an opportunity. I didn't know who would be waiting for me there, or what they wanted me to admit, sign, or give up. All I knew was that the next move would change everything. As I sat there in the dark, phone glowing in my hand, I realized the warning hadn't just been about my home. It had been about the life I thought I understood. And whatever was coming next was no longer something I could avoid. I didn't sleep at all after that message. The address kept replaying in my mind, pulling at memories I had buried years ago. It was an old community center on the edge of town, a place I used to visit before my life became what it is now. Back when things were simpler. Or so I thought. The fact that someone knew about that place told me this wasn't just about my marriage or my house. This went further back than I wanted to admit. At dawn, my phone vibrated again. This time it was from an unknown email address. No greeting. No explanation. Just a scanned document attached. I opened it with shaking hands. It was a legal form, partially filled out, with my name typed neatly at the top. My signature was there too. Or, at least, something that looked like it. The date was from 3 years ago. I had no memory of signing it. As I scrolled, my stomach dropped. It referenced financial responsibility, property authority, and medical consent. Pages of small text, written in language designed to confuse, but the meaning was clear enough. Someone had been given permission to make decisions for me under specific conditions. Conditions I didn't remember agreeing to. Conditions that could be triggered quietly, without my knowledge.
That was when it hit me.
This wasn't just betrayal. It was preparation. I remembered the doctor's face again, the fear in his eyes. If this document was active, if someone was trying to move things into place, then my hospital visit hadn't been random. It had been timed. Someone wanted a record. A paper trail. A reason. My phone rang, and this time I answered. It wasn't my spouse. It was my mother.
Her voice sounded tight, worried.
She asked where I was and why my spouse had contacted her in a panic, saying I was unwell and refusing help. I felt the ground shift beneath me. Family was being pulled in now. Narratives were being planted. I told her I was fine, that I just needed time. She hesitated, then said something that made my chest ache. They seemed so concerned. They said they were afraid of losing you. Losing me.
Not worried about me.
Afraid of losing me. After the call ended, I realized the second twist wasn't about another secret person or hidden deal. It was about control. About rewriting the story of who I was before I could speak for myself. If enough people believed I was unstable, confused, unreliable, then anything signed in my name would look reasonable. Necessary, even. I drove to the community center hours before the meeting time, parking far away and watching from a distance. The building looked abandoned, but a single light glowed inside. A car I recognized pulled up shortly after. Not my spouse's. It belonged to someone from their work. Someone they had always described as just a colleague. Another car arrived a few minutes later. Then another. Too many for a simple conversation.
My phone buzzed again.
A message from my spouse.
Please stop this.
You're making it worse. I stared at the words, realizing how carefully everything had been framed. My resistance wasn't seen as self-defense. It was being labeled as proof. I checked the document again, scrolling to the final page. There was a clause I hadn't noticed before. It mentioned a medical evaluation required to activate the agreement. A single professional opinion could tip everything into motion. Suddenly, the doctor's warning made terrifying sense. He hadn't just seen danger. He had been asked to be part of it. I sat there, heart pounding, watching shadows move behind the community center windows. People were already inside, talking, planning, waiting for me. Then another notification appeared, one I wasn't expecting. A message from the doctor, sent from a different number. Just 6 words. They don't know what you know. I looked up at the building again, my hands tight around the steering wheel. For the first time since this began, I felt something other than fear. I felt clarity. They thought this meeting was the final step. They thought I was walking into their story, their version of events. But they had underestimated one thing. I was no longer trying to survive quietly. As I stepped out of the car and started toward the entrance, my phone recording in my pocket, I knew the next moments would decide everything. Not just where I lived or who I trusted, but whether I would ever get my life back. And inside that building, they were about to realize I wasn't as powerless as they believed. I pushed the door open and stepped inside the community center, my heart beating so hard it felt like it might give me away. The room smelled like dust and old paper, the kind of place forgotten by time. A folding table sat in the middle, surrounded by chairs. My spouse was there, along with the coworker I had seen earlier and 2 other people I didn't recognize. When they all turned to look at me, the room went silent. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my spouse stood up slowly, hands open, like they were trying to calm a frightened animal. "You don't have to do this," they said gently. "We just want to help you." Hearing those words made my stomach turn. The same words had been used on my family, my friends, and now they were being used on me. I didn't sit down. I stayed near the door, my phone recording everything. I asked them to explain why legal documents existed with my signature that I didn't remember signing. I asked why my medical visit had triggered so much activity. I asked why other people had access to my house. The co-worker exchanged a glance with my spouse, then cleared their throat. They started talking about concern, about stress, about how I had changed over the last few years. They painted a picture of someone overwhelmed, someone who needed guidance, someone who couldn't be trusted to make decisions alone. It was rehearsed. Every word fit neatly into a story designed to sound reasonable. Then I interrupted them and asked one simple question. "Why did you rush this now?" That question changed everything. The coworker stiffened. One of the other people looked down at the table. My spouse hesitated just a little too long before answering. That hesitation told me more than any document ever could. I told him I had spoken to the doctor again. I said he had refused to sign off on anything. I said he had reported what he'd been asked to do. That was the first crack. Voices rose. Explanations overlapped. Someone accused someone else of being careless. Another person said the timing wasn't supposed to be like this. The calm concern vanished, replaced by frustration. I watched it all quietly, realizing how close I had come to losing control over my own life without ever understanding why. I pulled out my phone and played back a short clip from earlier that day. A recording of the coworker, caught on my car's dash camera, talking on the phone about finalizing authority and making it official before questions start. The room went still again. No one denied it this time. My spouse looked at me, then really looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear instead of confidence. "You weren't supposed to hear that," they said softly. I replied with a calm, "I didn't feel. I wasn't supposed to see a lot of things." The truth came out slowly after that. Not in one big confession, but in pieces. The documents had started as a way to protect assets. Then they had grown into something more. Control over finances. Control over property. Eventually control over decisions. All justified under the idea that it was for my own good. That if I ever resisted, it would only prove their point. I told them the meeting was over. That anything else they had to say could be said through lawyers. I told them my recording had already been backed up and shared with someone I trusted. That was a bluff, but they didn't know that. Fear works both ways. I walked out before anyone could stop me, my legs shaking but my head clear. Outside, the night air felt sharp and clean. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. Lawyers got involved. The questionable documents were challenged. The doctor provided what he could without risking everything. The story my spouse had been spreading unraveled once facts replaced concern. Friends and family began to see the inconsistencies. The narrative lost its power. I moved out officially, staying with people who now knew the truth. The house was locked down. Access changed. Boundaries drawn. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't painless, but it was mine again.
I thought that was the end. I thought the danger had passed.
Then, a week later, I received one final message. It wasn't from my spouse. It wasn't from the coworker or anyone connected to them. It was from an unfamiliar number with a single sentence that made my blood run cold. You are never the main plan. Attached was a file. Old records. Older than my marriage. Records connected to that same community center from years ago. My name was there again, linked to a decision I had made back then, one I barely remembered because it had seemed small at the time. A favor. A signature. A moment of trust. As I read through it, I realized the truth was even bigger than I had feared. What my spouse had tried to do wasn't the beginning of the story. It was a continuation. They hadn't created the plan. They had inherited it. And somewhere beyond the people I had confronted, beyond the documents I had stopped, there were others who still believed I belonged to an agreement I had never fully understood. I closed my phone slowly, the weight of that realization settling in. I had escaped one trap, but the warning from the doctor echoed in my mind again, clearer now than ever. It hadn't just been about running from home. It had been about never letting my guard down again. I didn't respond to that final message right away. I sat with it, letting the shock settle, letting my thoughts slow down enough to make sense of what I was reading. The records weren't dramatic on the surface. No threats. No obvious crime. Just paperwork, meeting notes, old emails archived and forgotten. But together, they told a story I had never realized I was part of. Years ago, before my marriage, before the house, before I thought twice about trust, I had helped someone. A small favor tied to that community center. A signature to support a project that claimed to help people in crisis. It had seemed harmless at the time. What I didn't know was how that favor had been reused, reinterpreted, and quietly expanded. My name had become a reference point, a connection, a door left slightly open. When I later built a stable life, married, bought a home, built credit and trust, that old connection became valuable. Not because of who I was, but because of what I represented on paper. Stability, reliability, access. Once I saw that, everything else clicked into place. My spouse hadn't invented the idea of control. They had stepped into an existing framework, encouraged by people who knew how to move quietly through legal systems and personal relationships. The coworker, the documents, the pressure to frame me as unstable, it was all an attempt to activate something that had been waiting for the right conditions. My hospital visit had almost given them exactly that. I took the file to a lawyer, then another. Both said the same thing in different words. The agreements were real, but weak. Built on assumptions and silence rather than consent. Powerful only if I stayed confused or afraid. Once challenged openly, they didn't hold much weight at all. That was the turning point. Over the next few weeks, I made decisions I should have made sooner. I cut contact where it needed to be cut. I spoke clearly to my family instead of letting others speak for me. I documented everything, not because I wanted revenge, but because clarity is protection. The people involved faded quickly once they realized the story they were building couldn't survive the light. My spouse tried to reach out once more, not with threats this time, but with regret. They said they had convinced themselves it was all justified, that they thought they were securing a future. I listened, but I didn't argue. Some explanations don't need answers. They just need boundaries. The doctor sent a final message too. He said he was relieved I was safe. He admitted he had hesitated before giving me the note, knowing it could change everything. I thanked him, not just for the warning, but for trusting his instinct when it mattered. Without that small piece of paper, my story might have ended very differently. Eventually, life slowed down again. Not back to how it was before, but into something steadier and more honest. I moved into a smaller place, closer to people who knew me for who I really was. I changed routines, but I didn't live in fear anymore. Awareness replaced panic. Knowledge replaced confusion. Sometimes I think about how easily it all could have gone unnoticed. How many people walk through their days assuming the systems around them are neutral, the people closest to them harmless. This experience didn't make me bitter, but it did make me careful. Trust, I learned, should never mean silence. The final twist wasn't that someone was still watching. It was that no one needed to be anymore. The power they thought they had depended entirely on me not understanding it. Once I did, it disappeared. I never went back to that community center. I didn't need to. It no longer held anything over me. What mattered was what I carried forward. The lesson that small decisions can echo longer than we expect. That listening to unease can save you. That sometimes the most important warnings come quietly on a folded piece of paper from someone brave enough to break the rules for the right reason. If there's one takeaway from all of this, it's simple. Pay attention to patterns. Ask questions when things don't feel right. Protect your voice before someone else decides how it should sound. And remember that your life, your name, and your story belong to you alone. That night, the doctor told me to run. I did. And because of that, I finally learned where to stand.